Okay, let's dive right into this. The Trump presidency stirred up some incredibly powerful and really divided feelings all across the globe. But look, we're not here to get into the politics of it all. Instead, we're going to use this period as a fascinating case study to explore a really powerful human emotion that secretly shaped how pretty much the entire world felt. And that emotion? Uncertainty. I mean, the world was split right down the middle, wasn't it? For his supporters, you had this view of a strong leader, someone confident, direct, totally fearless. But for his critics, he was seen as a dangerous disruptor, someone whose unpredictability felt like it was threatening the very foundations of democracy. And this wasn't just your typical political disagreement, right? This was a fundamental clash in how people saw the world itself. So, with a divide that deep, you have to ask, was there anything that actually united these two completely opposite views? I mean, could there be a single underlying feeling that people on all sides were experiencing, whether they loved the guy or were terrified of him?
Well, the answer is yes. It was this one thing: uncertainty. It didn't matter what your politics were, the world it didn't feel stable. It felt tense. It felt unpredictable. And that feeling, right there, is the absolute key to understanding the psychology of that whole era. But here is where it gets really interesting. This single feeling of uncertainty, it wasn't the same for everyone. It kind of fractured and showed up in really different ways depending on where you were in the world. Okay, so in the United States, the main feeling was just division. But look around the rest of the globe. European leaders, they felt deeply uneasy. Asian nations, trying to figure out trade and security, they felt a profound sense of uncertainty. In the Middle East, long-standing alliances suddenly felt totally unstable. And developing nations, they felt incredibly vulnerable. See, this wasn't just about liking or disliking a leader. It was about the fact that predictability seemed to have just vanished.
So this all brings us to a really core psychological principle. To really get why the world reacted so strongly, we need to understand something fundamental about how our brains process threats. And it turns out we have this deep-seated fear of the unknown. And this leads us right to the key concept for this whole explainer. It's called psychological uncertainty. The idea is pretty simple, actually. As humans, we are basically hardwired to fear what we can't predict way more than a danger we can actually see coming. A known threat? Okay, that's manageable. But an unknown one? That's what creates that constant nagging anxiety. Yeah, think about it like this. You can prepare for a known threat, right? Whether it's a war, a recession, whatever. You can make plans, you can build up your defenses. But how do you prepare for total unpredictability? The honest answer is you can't. And it's that feeling of powerlessness that generates such intense anxiety. And the crucial thing to understand here is that this wasn't just a random feeling people had. It was being fueled by a very specific leadership style. You had major policy decisions being announced on social media. Alliances that had been solid for decades suddenly seemed to be shifting overnight. This wasn't just a different way of doing politics. It was a system that created a constant gnawing lack of trust. The world literally didn't know what the next day would bring.
Okay, so where does this all lead? Well, this psychological feeling of uncertainty, it didn't just stay in people's heads. No, it started to have very real, very tangible consequences for the actual systems that hold our world together.
It's basically a chain reaction. Think about it. All our global systems, trade, diplomacy, security alliances, they're all built on a foundation of predictability, of trust. So when you inject radical unpredictability into that system, what happens? That trust starts to erode. Alliances get weaker. And pretty soon, nations stop cooperating as much and start acting in a more defensive, look out for number one kind of mode.
And the result was this really fundamental shift in the whole global mood. You could say the world moved from what we call cooperative mode, where trust between nations was sort of the default setting, to a defensive mode, where every country felt like it had to put itself first just in case. But this whole thing wasn't just about governments and high-level diplomacy. Not at all. This feeling of global anxiety, it trickled all the way down and had a huge impact on the lives and the decisions of everyday people. So let's just ask the question directly. How did all this high-level instability actually feel for, say, a business owner, or a student, or an investor, or just a regular worker? Well, for one thing, it created this constant low-level hum of economic fear. You had investors worried that a single social media post could send markets into a nosedive. Workers were legitimately afraid that sudden trade wars could just erase their jobs. And businesses? How could they possibly plan for the future with that much instability in the air? And it went way beyond just economics. You had students who wanted to study abroad, suddenly worrying that visa rules could change on a whim. Immigrants were living with the constant fear of sudden deportation. The very fabric that connects us globally felt like it was under threat, as even whole nations started to fear being isolated. So, to sum it all up, the crucial point is this. This wasn't a physical fear like you'd feel in a war. It was a deep psychological insecurity. It was the feeling that the very systems we all rely on to keep things stable were themselves becoming unstable. All right, so as we start to pull this all together, let's talk about the legacy. I mean, how will this era be remembered? Historians will debate the policies for decades, for sure, but the emotional memory, that's something else entirely. And here we are, right back where we started, with that deep division. For some people, all that disruption was seen as a sign of strength, a kind of courage and honesty. But for so many others, it was just seen as chaos, a source of real danger and instability. And those perceptions, they're still just as split today. But underneath all that division, there is that one single thing that almost everyone agrees on. Whether you thought it was a good thing or a bad thing, pretty much everyone on the planet felt it. The world simply became a much more unpredictable place. And that really leaves us with a final, big idea to think about. This whole explainer, it isn't really about politics or loving or hating any one person. It's about a fundamental human need for stability. Leaders don't just shape policies and sign treaties. They shape the emotional feeling of the world. They shape how safe we all feel. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What is the